So we're now going to do a quick lesson about the properties of limits. So say I have two functions, f of x and g of x. And I tell you that the limit of f of x as x approaches c is infinity, and the limit of g of x as x approaches c is a, where a is any constant. Okay, so one of the limits equals infinity and the other limit equals a constant. And we're going to see what happens when you add, subtract, multiply, and divide these two limits. Or these two functions, actually. Okay, so first example here is the limit of f of x plus g of x as x approaches c. Okay, so if we have the sum of two limits, if we're doing a limit of the sum of two functions, we can just simply do the sum of each limit individually. So this is equal to the limit of f of x as x approaches c plus or minus the limit of g of x as x approaches c. So then this thing is equal to infinity. The first limit is equal to infinity. The second limit is equal to a constant. Infinity plus or minus any constant is still infinity. So there you go. The answer is infinity. Okay, so what happens if you switch the two functions, switch order? It's going to be very similar. So the limit of g of x plus or minus f of x as x approaches c, that's going to be the limit of g of x plus or minus the limit of f of x. Okay, so it's going to be a plus or minus infinity, and this constant is much smaller than its infinity, so only the infinity sign counts. So the answer is plus or minus infinity. Okay. Now, what happens if you take the limit of the product of the two functions? So limit of g of x times f of x as x approaches c. Okay. Well, now, let's see. F of x is equal to infinity, and g of x, the limit of that, is equal to a constant. Now the question is that constant positive or negative? Right, so if a is positive, that means that this is going to equal infinity. The limit is going to equal infinity if a is positive. And the limit is going to equal negative infinity if a is a negative number. Right? Because if you're taking the limit of the product of two functions, you can take the limit of each function and then multiply the two limits back together. Okay. And so what happens if you have taking the limit of f of x over g of x as x approaches c? Okay, so this is going to be the same as taking the limits individually. Okay, so that's going to give you infinity over a, right? So if a is a positive number, then infinity is going to be, then the answer is going to be positive infinity. If a is a negative number, then the answer is going to be negative infinity. Okay, so it's going to be plus or minus infinity depending on the sign of a. Okay, and then what happens if you have f of x on the bottom? Well, if you have f of x, the limit of f of x here is infinity. So we're going to have something like this now, a over infinity. Well, if you think about it, what is this going to go to? Well, if you have something divided by something that's increasingly large, this number is smaller than this, and this number is smaller than this. So as you approach infinity, the fraction is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point that it's going to go to 0. Okay, now the question is, does the sign of a matter? No, it does not. And the reason is because if a was positive, that means that you're approaching 0 from the right side of the number line. But if a was negative, the limit will still approach 0, but in this case you're going from the negative, the left side of the number line, and you're going up to 0. So it doesn't matter what sign A is, it's still going to approach 0. Okay, so let me show you an example of this case here. So the question is, what is the limit of x over tangent of x as x approaches pi over 2 from the positive side? Right, so in this case, the issue here is that tangent of pi over 2 is equal to infinity, right? The limit is equal to infinity. The actual tangent pi over 2 is undefined. So we can write this as okay, the limit is going to equal now here I chose the right hand limit. Okay, so let me write that in. So I can do a direct substitution in this case, in the top case, so that's just going to be pi over 2. In the bottom case, so what is the right hand limit in this case? So tangent is like this. And you have pi over 2 here, so if we're going to take the right hand limit, that means you're coming from the right, so we go down to negative infinity. Well then, in this case, you have infinity in the bottom, it's going to go to 0. If you take a look at the graph here, that's the case, right? We're going to 0. This is pi over 2 here. Right there. So it goes to 0. Notice that in this case, the sign doesn't matter, as I said before, because we're still approaching 0. Okay? And that's about it.